I am in my late 30s and long for a marriage and a family.
By the way, you're not in your late 30s.
Oh, no, I'm older than that. I don't want to settle for a spouse that isn't right for me, but how do I know if my standards are too high? Take it away, Greg.
Well, let me digest this question here. So, late 30s. So this is somebody who feels like, I'm assuming based on this question that they thought or planned that they would be married by now.
Mm-hmm.
That they would starting to get to an age. We don't know if this is a male or female, right?
No, we don't. But I mean, either way, I think you feel like your clock is ticking to some degree, right? Like time is still passing you by,
Yeah.
even if your biological clock isn't ticking.
Right. Okay. So
they have high standards. They want to make sure that they have.
Yeah, I guess my question would be around what do they mean by standards, right? So if I'm going like, should I lower my standards? I would say, well, write down your standards. What are they, right? So if you're like, hey, I'm so specific, this person has to be 6'4", 220 pounds with 7% body fat, and this color hair and that job and that income level and blah blah blah, right? You might need to chill out a little bit. but I think like if you're going like what are the standards that are your non-negotiables? Like what are the things that you go, this is really important to me in my life partner. This is important to me in the person I'm going to marry. I'm going to totally hitch my wagons to. Like we're somebody that frankly, if we don't have kids, like we don't have a family, maybe that is your desire and you want to have a house full of kids and whatever, but somebody that like, even if we don't, like this is my person and all of that. And so, I mean, I think sometimes people, I've heard over the years in church, people go, yeah, I made this list of 17 things that I wanted and God brought me, Prince Charming or whatever. And yeah, I mean, sure, that's great. And sometimes it happens, but I think sometimes people are maybe majoring on the minor things going like, I won't lower my standard. And again, I'm not here to tell someone, to which ones of their standards they need to let go of or whatever. But I guess my 2 cents on it would be, I would zero in on character. I would zero in on the type of person that that you want to be connected to and that you want to do life with and that you want supporting you and you're supporting them, and kind of focusing on that.
Yeah. I would say to call out something that you mentioned in the first sentence. I think there's a big difference between like say moral standards and preferences. And for you to be able to separate out those two categories.
That's good.
All the things that you mentioned in your first descriptor sentence are all things that can be taken away. Aside from height, I mean, I guess unless you lose your legs or something. But we're all going to shrink a little with age, right? But it's like our bodies will change. Your hair will go gray. You could lose your job, right? Like all of those are things that will probably change about a person to some degree over time. So there's nothing wrong with like having certain things that you're attracted to and whatever, but like getting to the point where someone has to stay exactly this way and not be a dynamic character for you to be attracted to them or for you to want to be in a relationship with them. I think that's a little bit of a red flag to like maybe ask yourself some good questions. Again, nothing wrong with having preferences, but just questioning them, right? And why they matter to you. Some people talk about like, I'm not going to date make somebody that makes less than a certain amount of money. Well, again, that can be gone in like that, in an instant. So it's okay that you have a preference for a certain standard of living. But if that's your main reason behind being with somebody, I think there's some questions you need to ask yourself about why that matters. What is that creating a sense of false security for you? Because it's not real security. It can all be gone. Stock market could crash. They could lose their job. They could be in a car accident. Anything could happen, right? And so I think separating out standards from preferences. A standard is something that you're like, man, no matter what, like if the world crumbles around us, we both agree on this. These things matter. Preferences are maybe around the way that somebody keeps house. Preferences like, and maybe you're, ultimate OCD and you're like, I can't stand having a fork in the sink, maybe you need to lighten up a little. Because that's not necessarily a moral standard, right? Like, it's okay that you don't want somebody that leaves a wet towel on the bed, right? Like, that's gross, or is just a total slob. But you might need to meet in the middle a little bit, because you're putting your preferences for life operating a certain way over your desire to like meet someone in a true communal relational space.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting how many things I think that we think of as very important before we get married, and then how much you realize they aren't important after. You hear people talk about like, we have all the same taste in music and we like, and it's like, you know what, like on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't really matter. If you don't like the same music, put headphones in, like, but is this somebody I can laugh with? Is this somebody I have deep conversation with? Is this somebody that will be flexible with me, that wants to journey through life with me? Those are the things I think you need to separate out.
I think one thing I would encourage this person is, in many ways, you're in a fortunate position to really be making this choice in your 30s, because, some people, they marry young, and there's some advantages to that in terms of having some years of youth together and all that kind of thing. But I think there are probably a lot of people that make choices in their 20s that, through the wisdom of a 20-year-old versus the wisdom of someone in their 30s. Sure. And so I would encourage this person to really sit down, and whether it's with a confidant or a counselor or somebody, and really like catalog your experiences, really like work to go, what have I learned? Like, what wisdom have I gleaned that put me in a unique position right now to make a really great choice, or to see life through a 30-something-year-old lens versus a 20-something-year-old lens, instead of like getting caught up in, wallowing in the regret of, oh, I wish this happened in my 20s, like, and, oh, I've lost time and I'll never get it back. Go, well, hey, you know what? I am where I am right now, and this is a really unique position for me to really glean this wisdom, and to make sure also, like, that you're looking at what those preferences or standards, like, where's that coming from? Why do I feel so compelled to have somebody that's at this income level, or this that looks like this, or whatever? Is it something to do with how I feel about myself? Is there something there that, like, if I could wrestle to the ground, I might feel less compelled to need this in a person that maybe in my head I know isn't that big a deal. It's not like, shouldn't be a huge priority, but for whatever reason I feel like I need it, like I have to find this or whatever. And so I think, again, somebody in their mid to late 30s is in a really good position to do that. Like, you're old enough to not be young, but you're still, young enough. You got a ton of life ahead of you. So I would encourage them, like, do that hard work, like dig into where are these desires and these quote standards coming from. I mean, I think you want to find somebody who, is a person of integrity, is somebody who, the things you really value in life, they value as well. And, again, some of the things that really matter in terms of, how they show up in doing life together. But instead of kind of, starting to feel like everything's slipping away, go, you know what, this is actually, this has some real advantages.
Yeah, I agree. And also kind of taking it all the way back to your first question, like with healthy conflict and that kind of stuff. I think that's another really important piece of this is maybe you do see, maybe you don't see eye to eye with somebody on every single issue, social issue, whatever, right? Can you still have a really healthy marriage when some of those things are not the same? Now, I think you need to separate out what is an absolute, like, no give moral issue for you, and what is maybe it bothers me that we don't see the same, see things the same way, but like at the end of the day, it's okay. You and I don't see everything eye to eye. We've had differences of opinion on different subjects, and we've had spirited discussions around it. But at the end of the day, we listen to each other's thought processes on it. It's actually been really enlightening for both of us at different times to step into someone else's shoes and consider it different. And we may adjust our views slightly, but still not totally come to the same conclusion. That's okay. It doesn't change my love for you. It doesn't change your love for me. And it doesn't change like the core moral issues that we are aligned on this, or just core life choices that we think this is highly important.
That would be a great example of a personality trait or a character quality that's important that may not show up, may not show up like at first glance. So like the idea of like somebody who is okay being disagreed with, or that is even open to the other side of the argument.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
that's a huge
there's
deal.
a lot of people who, you say something that they don't agree with and you're just shut down.
Yes.
And they don't even listen.
They're not curious.
Like a terrible listener. Like they're just, now it's just like, I'm talking to a wall. So either we can't talk about these things that we disagree about, or if I do, it's just incredibly frustrating because you're not even trying to understand a point of view other than your own. So that would be a great example of something that probably in your 30s, you're going to value a lot more than your 20s. In your 20s, you're like, sometimes it's somebody that maybe boosts your status or somebody that makes your heart go, skip a beat or whatever. And yet you find out, well, hey, that person kind of gets off on having people hot for them or whatever. And so they're maybe not as trustworthy, and you're going like, hey, I wanted the one that was turning everybody's head, but that person loved turning people's heads, and now they drove me crazy, and they're full of themselves or whatever it might be, right? Or somebody, you over time you start to realize like there are certain types of people you're just naturally more compatible with, and those sort of character traits, you go, man, I enjoy being able to have a conversation where we tilt the prism on this idea, or we disagree, and actually this person's open to my perspective and I'm open to theirs. That's a really good example of that type of thing. And that's where I would say to this person, like you're probably in a better spot than you feel like you are.
Yeah. I agree.
To really step back and evaluate. So when you say lower your standards, I think it's probably time to figure out what standards really matter and which ones are okay to go ahead and lower and let go of.
Yeah. Yeah. What's a standard? What's a preference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.